watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's go straight to our top story. The Philippines remained a lower middle income economy. That's after the pandemic plunged the GDP into a record contraction last year. Now, fresh data from the World Bank showed that the country's per capita income, including gross national income figures, dropped by 11% to $3,430. That's from $3,850 in 2019. The 2020 reading is within the lender's income bracket for lower middle economies of $1,046 to $4,095 per person. The Philippines joined 54 other countries in the lower middle income bracket, which includes ASEAN neighbors, Indonesia and Vietnam, as well as India. Domestic economy fell by a record 9.6% last year, and NEDA Chief Carl Kendrick Chua estimates 2 trillion pesos in economic output losses for 2020. Chua is optimistic that the government is still on track to be within the higher income bracket by the second half of 2022. The government targets a GDP growth of 6 to 7% this year. Meanwhile, UK analytics firm Global Data forecasts a slower than expected growth for the Philippines this year. It expects GDP to grow by at least 5%, saying the slow pace of vaccination rollout and the possibility of lockdowns may dampen recovery. Inflation likely slowed to 4.3% in the month of June, but is still above the Bangko Central's target for the sixth straight month. That is according to a median estimate of 14 analysts polled by Businessworld. This projection matches the midpoint of the 3.9 to 4.7% estimate by the Bangko Central. It is also faster than the 2.5% inflation rate in June last year, but slower than May 2021's 4.5% print. Analysts largely attributed this possible slide in inflation to lower food prices. That's after the government raised the minimum access volume and cut tariff rates for pork imports this year. But if the 4.3% estimate proves to be accurate, then June will have been the sixth straight month of inflation, breaching the BSP's year-to-year target of 2 to 4%. The Philippine Statistics Authority will report the actual June CPI data. That's tomorrow, July 6th. And the Philippine Stock Exchange is eyeing to host the trading of cryptocurrencies in the country. PSE President Ramon Monzon said the PSE should handle structured trading of crypto in the Philippines to ensure investor education and protection. This comes after Monzon admitted that cryptocurrency is an asset class that they cannot ignore any longer. The PSE is now waiting for the rules from the SEC on how digital asset trading will be governed. Meanwhile, Monzon added that the PSE will continue delisting companies that have been suspended and have not been trading for some time. The Bourse's Issuer Regulation Division is expected to clean up the list in the next few weeks. Monzon explained that companies that have failed to file annual reports on time and correct negative stockholder equity in the past 3 years may be involuntarily delisted, while the companies that have applied for voluntary delisting and have not traded for a time may also get stricken off that list. Welcome to a new trading week. Let's kick off with some news on the vaccine front. You can see on my Bloomberg terminal here how the new cases of COVID-19 have evolved here in the Philippines compared to the rest of the world. And here is some good news, at least for those who are hoping to travel. The IATF has now approved the COVID-19 vaccine cards as an alternative to testing, which is currently required for travel. So they have said that domestic vaccination card or a certificate of quarantine completion would count as an alternative now to the testing requirement, of course, which the LGUs can now be using. Now, what is interzonal travel? That is moving through different quarantine classification areas. And that now means that 7.53 million individuals who have been fully vaccinated can take advantage of that you've actually need to complete more than 2 weeks after getting your second vaccine shot to qualify. So some good news here on the travel front. Now let's take a quick peek at equities here. I do have my terminal here, taking a quick peek first at Wall Street and how that had performed on Friday. You can see on my terminal here all three indices over in Wall Street, Dow Jones, S&P 500, and the Nasdaq 500. Were actually at record highs last Friday. This streak was the longest run of consecutive record closes since June of 1997. That's according to S&P's Dow Jones indices. So the S&P up for a seventh straight day. Now, what was going on in the U.S.? You have jobs data for June showing quite robust hiring here. Now, let's take a quick peek at whether that has spilled over this week into our local bourse, and you could see that we are sustaining the 7,000 levels, up by 0.01%, so quite flattish here, but nevertheless keeping the faith at that 7,000 level. Recall that we breached that strong psychological resistance level last week, and some analysts are saying that we may sustain that upward momentum. Of course, a lot of catalysts in the coming days. You've got whether further reopening, at least in NCR, will be happening, plus inflation figures coming out for tomorrow. Let's take a very short peek at our performers this morning. Best performing at this moment, Security Bank up by 1.2%, followed by DMCI and RRHI. But on the opposite end, you've just got a few losers actually, led by URC, JG Summit, and SM Investments Corporation. Now, finally, just one stock to be watching out for here. That is San Miguel Assets Power Unit. This according to DOE in a letter to a think tank, that SMC has dropped 3 coal-fired projects. This is a letter to the Center for Energy Ecology and Development, or SEED. They say that SMC Global Power Holdings will no longer be pursuing 3 planned coal-fired projects. That is a total capacity of 1,500 megawatts. These are coal-fired plants in Pagbilao and Saria in Quezon, and one in Malabuyok in Cebu. Businessworld had asked SMC Global Power to comment, but as of this moment, there is no reply. Now, here to talk to us about whether these 7,000 levels will be sustainable moving forward, we have with us Rastine Mercado. He's the OIC and the head of research at Chinabank Securities this morning. Good morning, Rastine, and welcome to the broadcast.
Good morning, Danie. Thanks for having me.
Rastine, let's talk about this rally first of all. Very, very exciting, and finally moving above that 7,000 level. It took a while, but here we are. But this comes amid several things that markets are watching this week. You've got inflation possibly still breaching the 2 to 4% target level. You've also got this new survey by the Banco Central saying that the business confidence is actually waning. Tell us more about your expectations on whether we still have room to sustain 7,000 levels.
Well, on one end, you're right. The index did close at around the 7,000 resistance, but that was primarily due to a rush of buying near the close last Friday. So despite the show strength, we're still cautiously optimistic with regard to further gains. Volumes haven't been so convincing, so that adds to the skepticism. We did see foreign buying last Friday, net foreign buying. So that adds a little bit of optimism to further upward moves. If the market does head higher, 7,100 to 7,350 might be the pit stops for the market. But then again, you did mention that some data releases for the week, inflation, and securities we're waiting for tomorrow. Expectations, of course, are saying that it eased compared to May. The primary reasons for it still remaining elevated are rising oil prices, electricity rates due to tight supply, as we saw in June. Of course, there's still the risks against the backdrop of the Delta variant being a key risk to investor sentiment. But if you look at it, zoom out, sentiment in other ASEAN countries experiencing a surge due to Delta appears to be resilient. Key market here to look at here is Indonesia, right? So another risk, of course, is the potential economic ramifications of another Taal volcano eruption. Hopefully, it doesn't come to fruition, but we have seen that kind of escalate over the past week.
Rastine, just the Taal issue, does that have any impact on markets whatsoever? Was that we've seen that repeatedly in the past year as well, or is this something that the government can address and that we've seen historically? It doesn't necessarily affect the movement.
Well, I think if it's the Volcano addressing those concerns, we did see market kind of acting to it last year. We had a similar episode in early 2020. So I think that did weigh on some companies. Of course, in terms of how widespread the effects are going to be, that's really going to determine how much effect it will have on consumer sentiment. But I think at this point, investors are more concerned about other COVID-19 related developments. So hopefully, not so much of an impact in terms of uh, investor sentiment.
Okay, dami pang issues na pinag-iisipan apart from that eruption. Restine, what is our relationship between the index and the rallies that we are seeing offshore, particularly in Wall Street? Are we now moving in step with the global optimism? And you did mention the foreign funds coming back in last week. Does that have anything to do with global risk sentiment?
Well, if you're looking at obviously global markets, especially in the US, right, they're actually quite strong. That's primarily because in terms of vaccination rates, they're at much higher levels than the rest of emerging emerging markets. So that obviously has been buoying those markets, developed markets, all the more. In terms of tantrums that we had over the past few weeks, we did see the US react adversely to pronouncements from the Fed, but obviously that has been reversed at this point. So I think there is a preference for developed markets, but then again, you can't ignore the recovery prospects of your other emerging markets, especially those that have been sold down earlier this year. I think that includes us. That's why we've been seeing an improvement in terms of our index as well.
Restine, we had PSE President Ramon Monzon say he's very excited about capital raising. First of all, he says that we may even surpass the record reached a decade ago. Tell us, why would so much people be raising capital right now in the equities market when interest rates are so low and at a very turbulent time?
Well, first of all, issuances are exciting. As we've seen with recent IPOs, most of them have risen. So you have Monde rising, you had Converge late last year rising as well. Uh, what this the capital raising isn't a surprise really, because higher equity, of course, translates to higher capacity to take on debt, right? So if you're looking to expand your business, raising equity at this point may be viewed as a part towards wanting to capitalize on borrowing at prevailing rates, which are really low. So more visible pipelines we've seen or we're seeing for the rest of the year and into next year are REITs, right? So they capitalize on the recurring nature of the leasing income of their assets, and they also help recycle capital to fund new projects. So all this while giving investors a stream of dividends. Of course, at the end of the day, right, what we're going to be looking at is tracking where the capital will be deployed and the accretion of value that it will have on the companies that deploy them. So that's what we're going to be paying attention to over the medium term.
And which REITs are you most excited about? Is it still exciting when the equities market is now, might have some sort of herd immunity bull runs, as some are calling it that, and other equity markets have also reached record highs to still be investing in REITs, which is a sort of safer instrument according to some, recurring income and as you already mentioned, something that has been a long time in the making.
Well, I think it all boils down to portfolio mix, right? So I think there will still be a lot of investors that want to invest in REITs just because they provide a more steady stream of income, which to some are likened to bonds, right? While participating still in the growth prospects of these companies. So in as much as that is concerned, I think REITs will be a mainstay in portfolios of those that want to diversify their holdings. So I guess all in all, demand for those offerings should remain robust.
And finally, just on the PSE doing crypto trading, or at least creating the platform for cryptocurrencies, your thoughts on that and how to tread the crypto markets right now? I mean, we saw these rising but super volatile during the pandemic. Is this an asset class that is here to stay? How can you liken it? Is it to be traded as a high risk asset, as an alternative asset class to equities? I mean, how should we treat this, especially if it's going to be now available to everyone here via the PSE?
Well, on one end, the main thrust of the PSE, considering it, is to protect and educate investors, right, with regard to these types of investments, which are really important considering the volatility of these instruments. So, of course, fundamentally, the fundamentals of cryptocurrencies remain a point for discussion. But then again, there's supply and demand, so that's what's driving fund flows and prices into these instruments. So, possibly having cryptocurrency trading in the PSE also adds a little bit of legitimacy to these assets through recognition. But I mean, we've seen how investors have been interested in these assets, especially in the light of the pandemic, right? So I think it's really a move towards making sure that investors are protected. So I think that should be good for all investors over the long run.
Okay, so just additional steps here to regulate something that people are nevertheless already doing. Thank you so much for those insights. That was, of course, Rastine at Mercado of Chinabank Securities.
Thank you for having me.
And here are some updates on the rumbling Taal volcano. FIVOLX warns that another Friato magmatic eruption that's similar to what happened last Thursday may happen anytime soon. Now, the agency made this announcement yesterday after observing a quote, anomalously high sulfur dioxide emission levels from the Taal volcano, which is still at alert level 3. The agency also warns of possible lahar flow due to torrential rains from time to time. Because of this, FIVOLX strongly urged residents of nearby high-risk barangays to remain safely evacuated. Meanwhile, the Batangas LGU and the Health Department plan to inoculate evacuees starting this week. Authorities said that this will give evacuees some peace of mind amid the troubling situation. And that's a first look into the business day. Today is July 5th, 2021. Catch Business World Live for the market close. It's at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.